Hey, good to see you. Thanks for coming. This is another episode of Wireframe brought to you by Design Systems House. I'm your host, Donnie D'Amato, and today we're going to be talking about the future of unique ways. Okay? Might be a little different from what we normally talk about because unique ways. What is unique ways? If you don't know, if you're listening to a Wireframe, you've never heard that before. We're going to talk about what unique ways, but as another special guest is on today, another special day, I want to introduce Thomas Girard, who is one of the first people who reached back out to me when I did a call for folks to be on the show. Very, I could see the excitement about being on the show, so that makes me excited. It's just excitement all around. So I want to have Thomas introduce himself and kind of explain what his background's all about and what we're going to be talking about today. All right, so Thomas, take it away.
Great. So yeah, my name's Thomas Girard. I'm working on primarily on advancing fields like creativity and innovation these days, and that happens through speaking and writing and scholarship. But basically, like as a speaker, I've given a popular TED Talk, and I've spoken twice for audience in Paris at the Sorbonne. I run a popular podcast, which is called UNIQUEWAYS, where we're just approaching 300 guests and have some of the biggest names in the creative world on that show. And I have a memoir out called Son of Greg Girard. It's about my travels early in life with my notable father, photographer Greg Girard, around the barren parts of Asia in my teens and early 20s. So that's me.
Oh my God, goodness gracious! That's a resume if I ever heard one. I mean, even pulling from that photography background in your family as well to really go ahead and share stories that way. So, you mentioned the podcast, you mentioned TED, you mentioned newer work that you're doing. Let's start with that podcast, right? So let's go deeper into the podcast. I did listen to a few of the episodes that are on there. I saw some names that I know on the show. I mean, Dan Mall was one of those names that was in there. So tell me how you got started in all of that, the Unique Ways podcast, and maybe even, let's just start there.
Great, yeah. So fairly early on, I was a guest on maybe 10 or 12 podcasts. And towards the tail end of that, I realized that I could probably do that too. At that time, I was on a kind of academic journey, and I was looking at other academics, and I was like, what are they doing that I'm not doing that's making them, take off in this way? These were like academics with a bit of a spotlight on them. And I looked at people like Brene Brown and Adam Grant and Rachel Botsman and realized that the one thing that they had that I didn't have was a podcast. And at that point, I really was like, oh, I need to do this. I was on this great podcast called No Fun City, and the host of it was really kind of pushing at the idea that anyone can start a podcast. And this was a different time. And it was a time when the kind of democratization of podcasting was starting to happen, and everybody and their parents and siblings were starting podcasts.
What year is this about? What are we talking about in terms of years?
2021, 2022.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And so so I basically had him as a mentor and figured out what equipment to buy and what kind of setup I needed. At that time, I had a good kind of physical space to use, but it was basically an IKEA desk with a stack of books that I wanted to sell and a Yeti mic and a laptop, and that's it.
That's it.
And I started there. And then it just kind of grew from there. I had early big supporters, people like John Maeda and Debbie Millman were on the show.
Amazing.
Very early on. They had no reason to be. They were being completely overly generous. And they came on the show, and that really made it take off. And after I had those names, other names wanted to be on too.
Definitely, yeah. So, I mean, having the names getting on the podcast. I mean, as a person who's podcasting literally right now, I mean, this is a little bit different because it's a live show, but ultimately, um, is there a secret in terms, or is it just you ask John Maeda and hopefully you get an email back and it happens, right? I mean, it's also possible in two because like you're talking about, a few years ago where maybe people were a little bit less busy and maybe now things are a lot more busy. I mean, especially with the AI stuff. I mean, you could imagine John Maeda is just cooking with AI right now, right? So, you know, what is what do you think it would take, like for me, to go ahead and be like, okay, um, what's John Maeda doing? What can I bring him on the show? How do I ask? How would I do that?
Well, I really scraped things together. I mean, I was really kind of grassroots at the beginning. I didn't have any strategy or I had some mentorship in terms of I had been on a podcast and I could look at what they were doing. But more or less, I was just like trying to piece it together. I wrote a letter, kind of a cold call email letter, pretty early on, that I used to approach some of the early guests, and it worked. And I was like, this is working. I'll just keep copy pasting this and see how it goes. And when it hit John, John saw what I was showing him, and he must have seen my LinkedIn, and he saw that I had done a master's degree at Simon Fraser University, which is a school here in Vancouver. And he has an honorary doctorate from Simon Fraser University. And so I chatted with his assistant, and she said that John wants to be on the show because you guys have that connection.
Great.
So luck, but you make your own luck, right? So you set yourself up so that those kind of coincidences will happen, and eventually they do. And then after you get a few names, then you can name drop. Definitely. And then people just want to come on. So.
Absolutely. I mean, the name drop, that definitely has to help, right? I mean, again, you put a John Maeda in there and it's like, wait a minute, John Maeda's on the show? Now I got to listen, right? Now,
Debbie emailed me like 5 minutes after she found out that he was on the show.
Absolutely. See, I mean, that's all you need sometimes, right? I mean, maybe I need like John Maeda's AI instead. I'll start small. He's probably not busy very much. So obviously the name drop's really interesting on that. But let's now talk about the conversations, right? Let's talk about how obviously the names are important because there's a lot behind the name, right? And there's a lot of expertise and findings and conversations and experience behind the name. So over the 300 episodes that you've done and counting, tell me some of the larger findings and points that you have, just generally speaking, and then maybe if there's any kind of, maybe even interesting anecdotes, we can bring those in as well. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So my background is in communication design. I did an undergrad in communication design as a teenager, and then worked teaching and practicing interaction design, user experience. So those were my areas, and that was my background, and that was all I knew, and that's kind of still all I know. So the podcast was going to be about that. There was no way I could do anything else. And so, especially early on, inviting guests, it was inviting friends or people I worked with before, and those people were all in the design space. And so that ended up being what it was. But I didn't really want it to be that. And I wasn't like focused on trying to make it that. And I kind of wanted it to be something else. It was like, what's interesting that I could do? And I had been very influenced by Debbie Millman and Design Matters, her podcast. And, her show was really about the arc of a creative life. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And I kind of looked at the kinds of things that I was talking about on the show and found that they were very much about the life of a designer or the life of a creative. And what does that look like, their everyday lives? And I created this list of 20 questions, which ended up being the 20 questions that I ask every guest on the show, almost to a T for the 300 episodes. And that list was very much about people's lives. And so, when John came on, we talked about design, but then we went into tangential areas. Like he talked about how when he was growing up, he was a carbs guy until he realized that he has to eat more protein in order to feel full during the day. And so he had protein for breakfast. And right after that, I went out and bought all these foods with protein in it. And, when Debbie came on, it was clear after talking to her for a while that she was very much in the design space at that time. And I was like, Debbie, you have a platform to reach people with your values and your beliefs, and this can be really good for people. And I don't want to take credit for that or anything, but she's done a lot of more mainstream press these days that focuses on projecting her values and sharing who she is as a person, which I feel like is very much the direction she's went in. Later, we had Don Norman on the show, and Don did a great job of being very selfless with his time and very much giving back, and was talking about the charity he runs, which supports early career innovators and creatives. And he talked about how he was very much of the opinion that there are many people who have lots of awards, who, because they have lots of awards, they get lots more awards. And because they get lots more awards, they get more awards on top of that.
Right.
And they don't really mean anything. And the people that need that recognition or need that financial support are the early career people. And so Don and I talked about that. But it's very, very much been like that. It kind of starts like, I'm a designer, you're a designer. And then we go into these tangential areas about, well, what is life like for us?
Yeah, I mean that sounds incredible because just the learning about the diet thing in conversations that you wouldn't even the focus certainly is about things about design, but we're all humans here. There's all things that are going on that we could also learn from that is just past that design metric, that I think is really interesting about this stuff. And I think the consistency of having those 20 questions each time, I think, is also a great value to the show, right? Because if your audience knows what's coming, right, that's helpful for the consistency. Because if you don't know what's coming, right, it's just like, oh well, I don't know if I'm going to like the show, so I'm not even going to turn it on, right? And I'm also trying to balance that line too, because especially since like this show, I do have it consistently at 5 p.m. But what day of the week it shows up, that's effectively random, right? It could be at any point, of the 5 days of the work week, but it could be any particular one of those days. So I'm still trying to figure out what the consistency is a little bit there, obviously, because I have my own personal life. This is not my full time gig. Obviously, I have other things that are going on, and this is just a passion project. I think similar to how you kind of started. I think a lot of podcasts, right? They're all passion projects until they end up not being in one direction or another, right? So with 300 episodes, it sounds like this is further than a passion project for you. So what came next after doing this podcast? You had you mentioned the TED Talk. So is that something that came from the podcast, or was that a different direction?
The TED Talk came before the podcast. I kind of had the same approach as Brene Brown in that way, in that I did a TED Talk. It kind of took off. I had like 100,000 views. And then I realized that some people were listening and they were like, what is Thomas going to talk about next? Or how is he going to speak next? And I needed something. And I knew that Brene Brown used her podcast as the next step for her. And so I thought I could do that too. Obviously on a different level, and to a different kind of audience. But that's very much what it was for me.
Okay, yeah. Now, the thing that I mean, look, I've been watching TED back years ago, right? I think many of us were just paying attention to, all those great talks that have been, right? And it's funny too because I did see a short opinion piece, I think, on YouTube about how the quality of TED has actually degraded over time, right? I don't know if you feel the same way, and it's an interesting kind of take that I heard from there. But I do want to know, because being a person who really likes public speaking, I love being on stage. I was an extrovert for a really long time. I always looked at someone who went on TED being like, that's the peak of your professional career, right? You have an entire crew of people, an entire audience of people supporting the thoughts that you want to convey on that stage. So before we go into the actual content of that talk, I'm just curious about how you got onto that stage. Like, because you said it wasn't the podcast. The podcast came after, right? Which I'm actually pretty surprised about. So what was the journey to get on that stage? That's what I'm really curious about.
So the talk was a TEDx talk. And in that world, I mean, that was the only reason that I was able to do it, was because it was TEDx. Because that's a smaller world and a niche world, and you can, kind of wrangle your connections to get on stage that way. But there was a process to it. But it was only afterwards, getting 100,000 views and being translated into 18 languages, and then eventually making it onto TED.com, which is quite rare. TED.com usually only hosts the big TED Talks. A few talks a year make it onto TED.com from TEDx, but not very many. And that's what turns it from a TEDx talk into a TED Talk. How do you do it? I mean, a lot of people start by doing TEDx and then try to leverage that into the big TED space.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, naturally, I'm a very introverted, awkward person. So it was kind of torturous.
Wow. That's the thing. From all of the media that you've done, right? The TED Talk and the podcast, all that stuff, right? It looks like, and especially again, talking all the way back earlier from, the top of the show where I said how excited you were to have this conversation and how excited I was in return. I don't find, an introvert to be excited to talk to people, but that might be a unique feature of you, right? That it's just like I do, as someone that identifies as introvert, but still likes talking to people. I think that's a good thing, right? So
Yeah.
now let's actually talk about the talk itself. So what was the content of the talk, and what was the thing that made it upgrade to a TED.com talk? What do you attribute that to?
So I went in pretty blind. So I early in my career, I had spent time in China, and I spent time in Shanghai and went to TEDx Shanghai. And they had a great turnout. There were maybe 200-300 people there. It was a beautiful venue, and but I didn't think much of it at that time, except when I found out that there was a TEDx event happening locally here, and I looked at the list of speakers they had so far, and I kept looking at it, and I noticed that people were dropping. And so I went up to, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to offer to do a talk. So I went to the TEDx organizer and I said, well, looks like you're like having trouble holding on to people to do the talks. So if you like, I can fill a spot for you. And I didn't know that people were competitive about it and came in with a really strong idea and got vetted. I didn't know there was that kind of process or that kind of like pruning in order to do the TEDx talk. I thought I was doing him a favor by like filling a spot.
I'll just help you out. Just throw the hat in the ring, make a move. Yeah, absolutely.
And he's like, well, what's your idea worth sharing? And I didn't have an idea. And I just was like, well, I could talk about spending time in airports, which I did with my dad early on in my early travels at strange airports and strange places. And he laughed, the organizer laughed, because he spent a lot of time in airports in strange places as well. And we had that kind of camaraderie. So that was just, again, kind of serendipity, kind of luck. But after that, that got me into the auditions for TEDx. to do this talk, which was going to be titled "How to Feel at Home in the Airport." And so I started auditioning, and it was about a year of auditioning,
Wow.
going through how to not just memorize it, but actually talk about it with cadence, talk about it like you're talking to a friend, talk about it with confidence. And for me, it's like terrifying every time. Like even
Hmm.
the rehearsals are terrifying. But I had a hell of a year, I'll say, and made it work. And I think in part because like I was. So I came. It came to the point where I got a call from the organizer, and he's like, "Okay, we're gonna have you as one of the backups, so you're probably in." And I was pretty happy with that result.
Yeah.
But at that point, people were still dropping,
Hmm.
and people were still like, you get nervous about it, right?
Right.
So enough people dropped, and they were like, "Okay, well, Thomas, you're in."
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what you're talking about, though, about some of the right place, right time kind of stuff that's going on in there. I mean, even, speaking with the organizer and having the connection of the airport kind of thing, right? Because you didn't walk in there saying, "Oh, I know this guy is all about airports," right? That's what I want to talk about. And if you find a person that has a passion about that, that happens to be organizing this thing, I mean, there it is. That's kind of the good start there. So I think there's definitely something with that. I mean, I look back to I just did a conference talk in the UK last month, and that I think was also a good deal based on connection, right? The organizer and I knew each other from our community and our space, and has seen my work. I've seen the great organization that he's been putting together for the conference and all, and all that together just makes a really good partnership and eventually event. Um, so I do have a question for you now, because you mentioned about the speakers dropping. So what did you ever find out why speakers are dropping, or was that just it just again kind of like random acts of events that was just this person's dropping for one reason, this is another reason? Was there anything to attribute that you might have found out on that?
It was nerves. People were scared. They didn't want to get on stage on the red circle in front of, two or 300 people
Mm-hmm.
and speak. They weren't used to that. And especially under the umbrella of TED, it adds this kind of expectation. And you have to be ready to live up to that. And if you're not, and so the caveat here is that the TED Talks in person are heavily edited. In fact, they're primarily made for YouTube consumption,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why they look so good on YouTube, because they're heavily edited. But there is that live component of it, and if you're not ready to be in front of those people, you're not going to be able to do it. In fact, you have to be so comfortable. And the irony of that is that I got up on stage and looked out of the audience and couldn't see anything, because you
Mm-hmm.
have these bright lights in front of your face,
Yes.
and it just looks like darkness. So you can't. So it's like you're talking to the darkness, but when you're in rehearsals, you don't think that's how it's going to be. So.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, I'm thinking about when I was preparing for my talk, and you do it so many times, in your living room, in your kitchen, even in the hotel room, right? You're doing it so many times there, and even when you do, even have the opportunity of doing it on stage, even that stage isn't really the full experience of what you're going to experience, right? I mean, having that bright light follow you around on stage, always being in your face, is just definitely something that's going to take you off your game if you haven't been prepared, right? So I think the year or so that you said that you were preparing for this, I think, is obviously shown in the talks itself, obviously, when when they're finally doing the production there. So it's that what is it, prior planning prevents poor performance, the 5 Ps. That's what I learned in communication arts years ago. So it's that thing that really makes a good performance.
I think a side kind of irony to it was that I was just so overconfident. I mean, like delusionally overconfident. So, the day of, we're doing last rehearsals. There are already audience members, not in the auditorium, but in the halls, and we're doing a final rehearsal. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to wear shoes.
Oh.
I'm just going to have my socks on, because it was like, that's kind of airporty, and I wanted to feel airporty, and I wanted
Yeah.
like the full costume. So I didn't wear shoes.
This is great.
This is last minute, and I'm telling the organizer, you know what? I'm not going to wear shoes.
That's great. That is great. That's the kind of. So, one of the things that I was thinking about when I was talking on this conference is that I wanted it to be memorable, not just from the content perspective, right? Because admittedly, I look at someone that's on stage and I'm watching them, and my eyes can glaze over, right? You get slides, and if it's not something that's unique that you could talk about, right? Sure, the ideas are good, right? They're worth sharing. The delivery could be really great, but then I forget because it's just another presentation. But if you walk out there and there's like the guy doesn't have any shoes on, this is different, even just a little bit, right? It's different, and that is enough to, I think, put you a little bit over the edge over any other speaker that did come in there with shoes, right? I think that's a really good point.
The other thing was that my talk was very short. Turned out to be about 2 minutes long, and a regular TED Talk is about 14 minutes long. And, I was rehearsing, and I was talking to the organizer, and, it's occurring to me that my talk is incredibly short. And he's like, no, there's this other guy that did 2-minute TED Talks. He did 3 big TED Talks, and they were all 2 minutes long each. And they were very well received. And he was like, you can totally play up that angle. And I had no idea that there was anyone like that. I mean, I thought they were all 12 or 14 minutes long. But yeah, mine was 2 minutes long.
Yeah, that actually is a big relief, because I mean, for the conference that I did a month ago, that was oh God, how long was that supposed to be? Was it supposed to be 20 minutes or 30? I don't remember, but it was long, and I memorized effectively the whole thing, which took me weeks to memorize, because I don't believe that the comfort monitor is going to help me. Tech is always a problem when it comes to that, and in fact, at this conference, tech was a big problem, so much so that I actually was really prepared, because I did the talk so many times and memorized it, so that I actually didn't need any monitor, related stuff. So I pat myself on the back for that. So, but I didn't realize how frequent you'll get shorter TED Talks, and I think it makes a lot of sense too, because you're trying to capture people's attention. And when you have a longer talk, we see this now in more recent media, longer videos like this one that we're literally making right now, we're already about half hour in, there's drop off, right? Because you're talking for such a long time. So that's why having these like clips of moments in a longer video, which is what we do for this show, is helpful in trying to share more of the cake, right? Because if you're interested in a particular clip, then maybe you'll be interested in the whole thing, right? That's a advice that a friend of mine gave me, because earlier on I didn't have, clips of this show. I would have the whole thing, and you would get started and be like, oh man, I don't know if I'm ready for a half hour of this or whatever it is, right? But having the clip, you get, oh, okay, well that's an episode that I might want to see. So I think that's a really good insight about, having these shorter moments. And those are also going to be easier to prepare because they're so short, and they're able to go ahead and really up the quality as opposed to the quantity of time. I think that's a really good point. So, so did the TED Talk. We do the 300 episodes of a podcast. And then I think you did Paris, you said recently you had on stage in Paris. So tell me about that experience and how that went down for you.
Sure. So I had my return to the Sorbonne in Paris for 2025. I did that remotely. In 2023, I flew into Paris and gave a talk. So my 2023 talk was about typography. It was about typography on election ballots. And this was before US News was front and center like it is today. And it was about how typography on election ballots can shape who you vote for or who gets chosen.
I love that.
And that wasn't a new idea. Paula Scher had talked about that quite a bit before. But it was a slightly different reframing of it, and it ended up landing in the way that I wanted. And that gave me a kind of foothold in the typography world. For 2025, I wanted to focus on user experience, which was another piece for me, and focused on a framework called UX Now, which is really about physical making and the importance of physical making in the age of AI. I believe that things like physical sticky notes and index cards and things like that, not the digital variations of them, but the actual physical ones are quite important. It's a personal kind of assumption of mine, I guess, that I'm still trying to test out. But I kind of have a strong feeling that there's so much knowledge that we don't know about. And we as humans grasp onto this idea that we have to know things and build our world around what we know. And I feel like there's so much that we don't know, and the physical making exposes some of that. And so I believe that through physical making, in combination with a lot of the AI tools, we can actually create some really magical things. And I believe that physical making will play a large role, much larger than it does today, at least, in our futures. And so that was a big part of what I was introducing in Paris 2025. And so in combination, 2023 and 2025 for Paris created this overall kind of structure that I use for teaching today.
Yeah. I really resonate with the physical part that you're mentioning there in the latest discussion that you're speaking about, because the way that I got started was actually physical media as well. I was an interactive sculptor before I got a computer in the house. So back in in the 90s or so, and I actually talk about this at my talk about how I moved to digital because physical ended up being really costly. Right? Where in the digital, you only needed the computer to build something, right? And because you only need that computer, it becomes really cheap to experiment and try and even send it out to someone or several someones to try something out, right? And it's so interesting about how much we're going to now most likely value that again, because now the amount of digital products out there is just, it really is a lot of garbage that you have to wade through to get anything that's quality. And I think we're going to see a lot of the quality in the physical again, right? Is that basically what we're looking at?
Basically, I mean, this ties into my career as a practicing designer and as a design educator. So in kind of traditional employment, the height of my practicing design career was being a staff UX designer at Lenovo's Innovation Design Center. And we were thinking 3 to 5 years into the future, and we were doing a lot of interesting making and prototyping processes. And that got me involved in the process side of things in a big way. I wasn't using sticky notes then. I was doing a lot of whiteboarding, but it was still that kind of act of, writing on the whiteboard and that kind of physical bringing people into the space and moving around the space and saying, oh, there's that idea and this idea and this idea. And that it was something I learned at Lenovo. And then returning to Canada, to Vancouver, where I'm based, I joined Emily Carr University of Art and Design and taught there for 4 years, mainly user experience topics. And I was very focused on non-digital. I was very focused on sticky notes and because of the Lenovo experience, I was very focused on brainstorming radical ideas that maybe had no place or could not be realized, but could be realized hypothetically through these kind of brainstorming processes like sticky notes and affinity diagramming. And so I did that for about 4 years. And after that, I realized that there was a real kind of thread here. And that's when these frameworks around physical making started to happen for me.
Yeah, I love that. That's great, and I like the education piece is super important as well. We're losing a lot of that too. The AI slop also, right? A lot of
Yeah.
misinterpreted things. So, all right. So we finished it obviously in this year with those ideas. Let's talk future now. The future of unique ways and that kind of stuff. So, what do we kind of expect? In that realm from your side.
So I've been collaborating with ChatGPT, if you can call it collaboration,
Sure,
and
sure.
doing my research and writing and plugging it in there and seeing what comes out. And there's been this big tendency for the advice to move the pod. Now that we're at almost 300 episodes, 292 episodes, to move the podcast into kind of a more archival space and a more curation oriented space, and to say we're not a podcast, but we're actually a kind of a legacy thing, with the guests all answering the same 20 questions. It becomes a kind of research piece. It's not just a podcast anymore. It's not tied to personality. It's not tied to a kind of once a week cadence that people kind of tune in for. It's more of this kind of collection of materials from many different people from many different backgrounds. Yes, many of them are famous in the design world, but many aren't. And it's a big mix of ideas, all answering the same 20 questions. So that ends up being a great kind of archival thing. And that's the space that I'm moving into towards more and more now. I've kind of created so much material over the last, let's say, 5 years, and not really done very much with it. And so, especially with the podcast, it's been a recent thing that I've started to curate it. Early on, I created a YouTube channel and had all of the episodes on YouTube as audio episodes, but I didn't really push people to look at that YouTube channel. And so it's only recently that I started creating playlists for UX and for typography and for innovation and showcasing a lot more of the episodes. You'd be surprised, and even making clips, as we were talking about earlier. The top 25 episodes all have 1-minute clips now that you can binge, and you can basically get an idea of what the entire Unique Ways is that way. I always had uniqueways.ca, but I didn't have much up there. And it was only recently that I held an event, a celebration event, with a live panel of people that had been on the audio show but wanted to be in person. And we had an in-person audience and a great turnout. A really supportive local design school here in Vancouver offered some high-end space and high-end tech and volunteers and everything for us to run the event there. And that was a big success for us. So it's these kinds of repurposing of existing content and repurposing of stuff that already existed, but I just never really took advantage of it. That's kind of where I've been going with the future of Unique Ways, and it's probably where I'll keep going more and more.
Yeah. One of the first things that I hooked onto was that you mentioned that this was a weekly thing, and that was a expectation that was happening. And now you just mentioned you're going to break the expectation a little bit, which we were talking about meeting expectations of users. That's very interesting, and I think that when you're established and have those 300 episodes, right? I think that's where you could really experiment, like what you're kind of talking about here, is that you're experimenting and say, okay, how is this now going to work with all of this content that I have behind me, all this experience that I have behind me, it's time maybe for a reinvention. Effectively, is I think what we're looking at here, and something that came to mind for me is that you have the same 20 questions for all of the guests, right? Is there a world where you have more of even a community aspect where it's like, okay, how would you answer those 20 questions, right? And have that as like a discussion that appears on the UNIQUEWAYS site or community area, right? Where people could be like, oh, yeah, I agree with that, or I disagree. Like, actually, because like you mentioned, you have big names on there, but you also have little names on there, right? And your community is full of those too, right? So I think as an idea, to continue on with this 20 question thing, I think that would be a killer way of growing in a different way from the podcast, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, every public conversation I have about UNIQUEWAYS these days is like, so Thomas, I want to ask you the 20 questions.
Of course, yeah, exactly.
Everyone, and we've done it, and it's been great. But you're absolutely right that it can be a community, it can be a movement, and different people asking different people the same 20 questions is a great kind of experiment and activity, and it can build conversation. I think it can be a great thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be me. And
Right.
I'm kind of getting tired of reading the same 20 questions.
Well, AI could do it now, right? That's going to just push it off to AI, and you'll have to figure out the next thing from there, I guess.
I'm half joking. I mean, there is an element of serendipity and of improvisation that goes on. And some people we shift away from it. With Don, we had maybe 4 questions out of the 20 questions that were ones that he wanted to do, and he just answered them at length, like very much at length. And we went a full hour answering those questions, only 4 of them. So with some of the guests, it's been like, Thomas, like some of these questions, I'm not going to answer them. I'm like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like they're going to be surprised by the questions, certainly, right? You know what's coming, and I think again, in terms of a pre-production kind of method for that as well, is like the pre-production is what the questions are already. For a show that I do here, I have to every show is the content is effectively different. So trying to figure out, okay, what are the things that we should touch on that it'll be interesting for you for people to see, hear, all that stuff. For each show is absolutely a challenge, and I think you've set up a very nice system for yourself with having those 20 questions in a very consistent way.
I needed them. I mean, I mentioned that I'm very introverted and awkward naturally. So if people knew about me and I didn't have the questions, there's like 0 chance that they would have a conversation with me publicly.
Yeah.
So, it had to be like very much like scripted. That was the only way it was going to work for me.
Yeah.
And and some people see the show not as Thomas's podcast, but as the UNIQUEWAYS 20 questions, and they want to answer the 20 questions too, because their friend did, or because their idol answered the 20 questions, and it's been a kind of fun thing for a lot of people.
That's great. So, is there one of those 20 questions that you think really gets to the heart of a conversation, a person? Is there something that's like that in that list that you could think of?
Yeah, so the most unique question on the list is, I think it's question 5, which is, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do? It's the only question that uses a little bit of like strange wording, and people see it as the one question that stands out. And people like the question. In fact, it's probably the most popular question. And in part because place can be so many things. It can be a physical place, but it can also be a kind of conceptual place. There's ideas of place making, and their academic ways of looking at place. So everybody's got a kind of different take on it. Whereas I have some guests who are like New York City based and grew up there and spent their whole lives there. And of course, they're going to talk about New York City. But then I have other people who are in some rural area and would much rather talk about the idea or notion of place.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm thinking even like, the place in time, right? A moment in time that either relive or you could see yourself in, or you want to relive because it was so impactful for you, or maybe even one that you don't want to relive because it was so disheartening or something like that. So I could really see how that can move in lots of different ways depending on the person, and you could really get a feel for that person there. Um, all
There are
right.
other patterns. There are questions that I get similar answers for. There's one question where they're asked to choose one word to describe themselves. And quite early on, somebody used the word curious.
Mm-hmm.
And that must have stuck or got into the ether or intuition of people, because a lot of people answer with curious now.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very kind of consistent thing. Um, there's a question about work-life balance, and I've changed it to be about work-life or life-work balance.
Mm.
And that's a question that people struggle with. A lot of people feel uncomfortable with work-life balance and feel like they don't have a grasp of it. And that's a very consistent thing. So there are kind of patterns and repetitions that happen.
Okay. Now, seeing those areas, and it sounds like you've changed some questions over time. How often are you changing questions? And is it based off of? I'm assuming it's based off of responses like the curious one in particular. But what is your thought process for those?
I don't change anything very much. There's a question about being a digital nomad. Are you a digital nomad? And I felt like that was starting to be a little bit outdated. And
Mm-hmm.
so these days I'd say, can you talk about your use of digital and or analog tools? And often I phrase it that way just to open up the conversation a little bit. It's a closed-ended question, so you could just say yes or no technically. But usually people have something to say about that.
Yeah, it's interesting to have. I wouldn't have expected a closed-ended question like that for this. I mean, I guess on the other hand, to keep some of these episodes reasonable, right? And to keep it for an hour. I mean, for 20 questions, you divide that, you get like 5 minutes a question. And for a person like a Don Norman who's going to go on for a long time and trying to convey the answer, having a couple of little layups probably help out a lot, just to keep things moving and get the answers out. That's pretty good. Um, okay.
We have shorter episodes. I mean, some people have looked at the patterns in which episodes are performing well, and they try to replicate those. So there was a time when, roughly 10-minute episodes were doing really well, and a lot of people were coming on and trying to do roughly 10-minute episodes.
Hmm.
And that was a pattern. I asked for a submission of a profile photo, and then I overlay a UNIQUEWAYS logo on top of that. And there was a specific style of profile photo that was working really well.
Hmm.
And I started seeing a lot of people submit really similar profile photos to that one. So people are looking and people are interested. It's kind of bizarre. I never thought it would get to that stage.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, congratulations on that success. And again, 300 episodes, and I'm just even thinking about scheduling. I'm just thinking about scheduling. A little bit of inside baseball when Thomas and I were connecting to have this show go on for us. My calendar was all screwed up, so trying to go ahead and even just make that work was its own challenge. And again, not being the regular day job of this, because normally you would have like assistant that just does the scheduling or whatever. Like, no, I don't have anything. I mean, I'm pressing buttons over here, right? I'm like, I don't have no assistants. It's just me and a table and this monitor over here when I have my friend Thomas on. So I want to wrap up here. Um, what's something that you would want listeners to take away with from the learnings that you've had from over 300 episodes, from the education space? What's the thing that you would want people to basically distill down into a piece of advice or learning that that would be helpful for folks out there?
Well, I always return to this question or this comment, which is this idea of following your passions and doing that throughout your life. And I was first asked about that on a podcast and said, I was raised with the idea that you should follow your passions and you should definitely not do that because you'll run into massive money problems. And then later I was like, oh, you know what? Throughout my life, I followed my passions and the money problems work themselves out. There's always something that kicks in that lets it work out for you. So, you know what? I'm going to be like, follow your passions. So the next podcast, I think it was on Brave UX with Brendan Jarvis. I was like, you know what? I think following your passions is a really good idea. You should do that. And then of course, you know, the pendulum swings back and forth.
Definitely, yeah. It ebbs and flows.
You know, if I had to give advice, I would say that's a great way to live, to follow your passions if you can. And of course, you know, we are designers. We have constraints in our lives, and we flourish because of those constraints. But if you can do what you're passionate about most of the time, you know, within a certain level of reason, you'll have a good life, and it should be good. Everyone's circumstances are different, but following your passions is not a bad way to live. So I would say that's my advice, is follow your passions.
I love that. Finally, to wrap up here, Thomas, where can people find you on the internet? Let people know so that they could see all your great work and keep up with what's going on.
Great, yeah. I just kind of refreshed some of my main platforms. People seem to find me through my personal website, which is thomaskgirard.com. On LinkedIn, we won't be connected at first, but you'll see a profile there, which is pretty cleaned up now. So check out my LinkedIn. It's on Thomas, O-N, Thomas. And also check out my Linktree. It's got all of the stuff that you need to look at, which is probably first to look at my TED Talk and my podcast, UNIQUEWAYS.
Hell yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for being on the show, Thomas. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. I really like knowing the ins and outs of you know, the podcast work that you've been doing, and obviously all the learnings that you've had over speaking with so many experts, and even the little people as well has been really great. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for our show here today. Thank you so much for watching the show for today. It was another great show. While you're here, before you go, make sure that you like and subscribe, you know, and do all the good things to help this show out, of course. Be a part of the Discord to continue the conversation if you have interests in this kind of stuff. And if you want to be a guest, absolutely go to wireframe.ds.house, submit your information in there. Any particular hot takes you might have or interesting stories that you want to tell, I'm very interested to know about it, especially when it comes to design, development, and disambiguating our world. Play nice in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.